All right, this time I'm sure we are live. Although, for those of you who were watching the old stream, I can see the video up on YouTube now. So it was probably working just fine. And I have since, we since panic fucked this thing for no reason because my producer was not sure we were live or going live, which I can't really afford for this show. It takes us too goddamn long to be not sure that it's going live.
Boy, I can imagine a second recording of a Vivisection would just be the most hopeless, dull, depressing thing you could ever listen to or watch. Just us having to say all that stuff over again. It would be like one of those 3-hour roundtables.
Yeah, which I'm doing one tonight, apparently. So I'm excited for that.
I had to cancel because I heard that you were going to be on. So I was like, one recording session per day with Zane is enough for me. Thank you very much.
Well, I assumed that was why they were calling me, was because you canceled. But to hear that you're canceling because you know that I'm going to be there. Anyway, we are here to talk about this UFC on Fox 23 card. Connor is reasonably enthused about it. I am reasonably not enthused about it, even though it is not a terrible card. I think I have just I've reached a personal nexus point of newness with some of these fighters that it's just a little, I don't know.
I think I appreciate that you said reasonable, because I think both viewpoints are reasonable. Like I think looking at this card and just eyeing it up as an MMA fan who is used to watching entire cards and having a lot of little gems throughout to look at, I can see being underwhelmed. And honestly, I think Shevchenko versus Pena as a main event doesn't really have a huge amount of pull. Like the card would maybe feel better if it was leading up to something that felt really big. But for me, you know, having done the research and stuff, having done my preview and everything, that's often the process that gets me hyped up for a card. And I think that the matchups are all really enticing. So
yeah, I think maybe what it is for me is part of it is that I don't know that I see one big fight on this card that I expect to be really electrifying.
Yeah, sure. But like, it also has some of my secret favorites, which is probably also the reason why I like it. It has guys like Li Jingliang and like Raphael, Assuncao, like my dark horse little hipster favorites. So
and it has some of mine too. I mean, I'm a fan of, well, obviously Francis Ngannou is not even a dark horse favorite at this point.
Not anymore, yeah.
You know, I like Ngannou. I even have a soft spot for Sam Alvey, and for, you know, I'm on your Li Jingliang enjoyment train, and for, you know, Luis Henrique, Frankenstein. It's hard not to be a little hyped for Frankenstein. It's just I think the fact that it's the what's killing me is the main card, I think, actually. And I realize I should be ultra hyped by Donald Cerrone versus Jorge Masvidal, but I honestly can see that being a slightly not great fight.
Yeah, I can see it being like a more of a chess match than a banger.
Yeah, I think if Masvidal approaches this, I mean, I think it's going to be kind of on Masvidal. I think that Masvidal's approach against Cerrone is not going to create a very good matchup. That's just kind of how I see it in my heart, is that we may get a fight where Cerrone is. Anyway, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Right. We can talk about that when we get to it.
Yeah. So let's actually just dive in at the bottom, though. And because there are otherwise, like, the card is full of fun fights. It doesn't have anything to really tie it together for me. I think that's what I'm eventually getting to. So let's start out with Jason Gonzalez versus JC Cottrell.
Should be more or less a back and forth kind of action fight for an opener, which works for me. JC Cottrell and Jason Gonzalez were both wrecked in their UFC debuts. Gonzalez cold-cocked by Drew Dober, and JC Cottrell cold-cocked many times by Michel Prazeres, and most importantly, taken down over and over again and unable to do anything about it, which is troubling for a submission grappler. Both guys are fun, both guys are hittable, and both guys are willing to exchange. So really, the fact that both guys are willing to make mistakes is what will probably make this a fun fight. I think Gonzalez is probably a little less hittable than Cottrell, throws more volume on the feet, and is a decent defensive wrestler. Whereas Cottrell has a solid ground game, but isn't much of a wrestler, and he's just kind of, I don't know, he's very kind of rote and one note with his striking. It's sort of like the super simple version of what I've always criticized Joe Lozon for. It's a very unimaginative approach to striking, where it's like, I've thrown the 1-2-3. Now I will throw the 2-3-2. Now I will throw the 3-3-1. You know, like, it's just like standard combinations. Not that a 3-3-1 is a standard combination. 1-1-3 maybe. It's just set stuff with no creativity or imagination. So I think Jason Gonzalez is just going to be the more fluid striker and stop the takedowns and probably survive one or two scares when he does get put on his back. But I think he'll win a pretty close, hard-fought decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think his debut showed that Jason Gonzalez has some real defensive liabilities, but he's actually been a pretty potent offensive fighter throughout his career. He's a good finisher. He's a good finisher off his back. He's a powerful striker. He hits with accuracy. You
get the feeling, because of recency bias, that Gonzalez is the more vulnerable fighter maybe, but Cottrell's been knocked out a couple times. And Michel Prazeres isn't a great finisher. If he were a better finisher, he might have finished Cottrell in that fight.
Yeah. That's, in fact, more of a sign that Prazeres is not a great finisher and never will be.
Right. He's great, though. Cottrell, he has his charm, doesn't he? That fire hydrant of a man.
Yeah, I have a soft spot for Michel Prazeres. I do. But Cottrell, his biggest problem is really that his striking is really disconnected from his grappling, because he only tends to throw big single shots from outside and has a very wooden stance and wooden mechanics. He's forced to shoot from way outside. And then he ends up in these long cage grinding takedown attempts that don't tend to get him a lot.
Yeah.
And so he ends up with these really slow, ugly fights where if he can control somebody physically, he can win. But he's not an amazing athlete. And at the UFC, he's not going to be able to control that many people. So
we really shouldn't talk about this fight too much, but there is one interesting thing I think that speaks to what you're saying, which is that Cottrell, because he's so rote with his punching and his striking, I think he's very upright and kind of stiff. Mm-hmm. And so he has to, in his mind, reach the end of the predetermined combination or move before he can transition to a takedown.
Yeah.
And being tall and then switching to wrestling, there's not much connective tissue, I think, to Cottrell's game, and that's the problem.
Gonzalez, he has holes, but Cottrell being a low power single note striker does not make me feel like he's going to find those holes. So I got to pick Gonzalez potentially by TKO. And even if Cottrell gets takedowns, I think Gonzalez is a better grappler, a more dangerous grappler off his back than Cottrell is.
He could probably match him there.
Cottrell is, however, the favorite in this fight, probably because Gonzalez got knocked out in his debut. Cottrell opening at -165, now -142. Gonzalez opening at +125, now at +119. Not a lot of movement on those lines. I don't even know that I would. You could maybe take a chance bet on Jason Gonzalez, but frankly, it's a little too low level of fight for me to. You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. There are actually a lot of tempting underdogs on this card. I've already looked over the odds, so I wouldn't waste your one or two underdog chance bets on Gonzalez.
No. And that brings us to flyweights. Alexander Pantoja versus Eric Shelton. This is an interesting fight. This is very likely to be a barn burner. And I am of two very distinct minds on this fight. First of all, Eric Shelton is very obviously the better prospect. He's the guy that he has the basic clean fundamentals to be on to make a run towards the top of the division. He's also got a problem with throwing in volume. And that's a hard problem to fix. And it kind of makes me feel like he's going to lose this fight because Pantoja is wild as hell. His striking is not clean. It is not pretty, but he throws a lot. He's aggressive as hell. And he's willing to kind of run himself anywhere and everywhere in search of a finish and in search of the win. And I feel like Shelton, his wrestling is not that well established. He's a good grappler, but he kind of seems like he depends too much on big man grappling. Like he kind of grapples like he's a lightweight, and I don't know how well that's going to translate at flyweight. Like I've seen a couple of fights of his where he had top mount and then like tried to posture up and immediately got swept and put on his back and ended up having to battle on guard for the rest of the round. And he's got a good guard game, but that's not, that's not a game you want to play at flyweight, is trying to be a control grappler who gets outmaneuvered in control all the time. So I feel like Shelton can probably battle his way out of trouble. He may even be able to knock Pantoja out, but I'm going to maybe pick Pantoja just to be more active every round and take a scrappy, ugly decision over a young fighter that's not quite got his game together yet.
Yeah, I think that basically mirrors what Patrick Wyman was saying this week on Heavy Hands. He basically that he saw Shelton like you do as the guy with more upside, but I thought very strongly, more so than he did actually, that Pantoja was the guy who was, or I guess it's Pantoja. I'm going back and forth all over this because I swear on Tough they kept saying Pantoja, but I think it's because both Benavidez and Cejudo wanted to show off how Latino they were. so they just kept like trying to, you know what I mean? Like I believe Benavidez said to Pantoja at one point, or in one of his fights, said about the guy he was fighting, he was like, "We call this cooking the beans, letting the beans cook." I'm like, Joe, is that some kind of weird attempt at like appealing to Mexican culture? What's going on here? So I don't know. I'm going to say Pantoja because that seems to fit the regular Brazilian Portuguese rules.
Yeah,
as far as I know them. Either way, Pantoja, I think, is a complete product. He's the fighter he's going to be. He's not been super active throughout his career, but he's been fighting for quite a while. Not actively enough that I think he's starting to fall off or anything. I think he's still more or less in his prime. But he is a complete package. And Eric Shelton could possibly be a better complete package when he's complete. That's very likely, in fact. But he's not complete. He's only been fighting pro since 2013. A couple of losses in there, so it's not like he's been blowing everyone away. And I could see him, the volume thing is a really prescient point. I could see him slotting ultimately into like an Ali Bagotinov role in his career where he's like this big, strong, fast guy who just doesn't quite seem to know how to take over the fight against higher volume, higher output top contenders. He's powerful, everything that you like to see from a prospect, but yeah, Pantoja comes forward. He will look for a way to get the fight to his kind of fight from any opportunity. Like he'll come forward after you. He'll take punches and strike with you. He will jump on takedowns. He will sprint grapple the moment your back hits the floor. He's a Novo União fighter, and he looks like it. More like Renan Barão than Jose Aldo, but that's still a pretty damn good place to be in against a really young prospect. So I take Pantoja, and I think I'll take him by decision. But I could definitely see a submission or something happening late if he happens to find the right opening.
If Shelton gives up too many bad positions on the ground, I think he could absolutely get submitted.
Yeah, I mean, Pantoja is a really good scrambler, and he, like all Novo União guys, he's a much better wrestler than he seems most of the time. His defensive wrestling is great, but he's actually a pretty good takedown artist when he really wants the takedown. So,
yeah. I don't have enough faith in Shelton to, like, watching his fights, it'd be like every 20 seconds he'd throw a jab or a 1-2, and if it knocked the guy down, that was amazing, and if it didn't, then he's just freezing lesser fighters.
Yeah,
and that usually doesn't necessarily carry over unless you really have an unbelievable edge in the UFC. And Pantoja seems like exactly the kind of guy who's going to ignore any striking edge you have and just be like, "Oh shit, I'll just charge at you and wing whatever I've got."
Shelton could very well end up being like a Mike Perry type, where he shows up and you say, "Whoa, he's way better than he looked on his tape." But even then, Pantoja is a much tougher test for his UFC debut than probably any of the guys Mike Perry's even fought yet. He's a more established flyweight.
And Perry, I even though I've expected Perry to lose, like, yeah, it could be like that. I think it's just when you get smaller, it's hard to be a knockout artist.
Absolutely, it definitely is.
That's the thing. Like for Perry, that's a much bigger ace up your sleeve when you're fighting at welterweight. and that's a bigger. But too, we saw Alan Jouban, kind of a wild man, just easily mauled Mike Perry in that fight, pretty clearly. All right, odds on that bout. Pantoja is coming in, opening at minus 140, now up to plus 100. And Shelton opening at plus 100, now down to minus 122. So those odds have swapped.
I wish they were more tempting, but I do think that a small bet is probably worthwhile on Pantoja as an underdog.
Especially if he keeps climbing. If he keeps climbing towards underdog status.
Yeah, if those odds slip any further into the pluses, definitely.
That brings us to a light heavyweight bout. Marcos Rogerio de Lima versus Jeremy Kimball.
Boy, what to do with Marcos Rogerio de Lima, It's just like he is now officially the light heavyweight division's glass cannon. He it's like first round losses, first round wins, and very little else. And it's tough to look at him and really know what to expect. It's tough to know like what happens if it doesn't end in the first round. We haven't seen it in so long. The last time he went to a full decision was a draw against Ben Ryder in 2013. What do we take away from that? No idea. So my feeling is that De Lima has really a few minutes in which he's really effective against most opponents, and then kind of starts to lose both his conditioning and his mental edge as the fight goes on. Gets a little too wild, gets a little stiff, has a little bit of that John Vellante thing going on in his style, where he just becomes this kind of stiff brawler as the seconds tick by. And Jeremy Kimball is not great, but he's also very tough. He can really take a shot, and he's got some of that Fabio Maldonado thing happening where he's actually got really nice, quick, straight punches, and he keeps himself in punching range so that you will fight him and you will hit him, and you can take him down if you want to take him down. But if you stand in front of him, you'll probably eat a bunch of jabs and quick shots to the jaw, little snapping punches. And I could really see that causing Jeremy Kimball to come away with a decision, or at least take De Lima to a split or something if the fight goes on. Because if De Lima cannot put Kimball away, I think he is really going to fall off. Do I think that's going to happen? It's tough, man. How can you go into the UFC debut with a guy like Jeremy Kimball and say, this dude's going to beat someone who is an established UFC heavyweight? I don't know. I guess, I think I'm going to take Kimball just to make it for fun. I think he's really not a very good fighter, but he's maybe the right kind of fighter to beat someone who wants to strike with him and is hittable and fragile and really relies on putting people away early to win. So I think I'll take Kimball by a close decision.
Yeah, that's fair, and it's not out of the realm of possibility. I'm gonna lean on Marcos Rogerio de Lima for this one, and the biggest reason why is seeing Kimball get like really firmly out wrestled and out grappled by Chris Camozzi. And that, to me, and I've watched a bit of Kimball's fights since here and there when I can find them, and his offense and his confidence in his offense has improved a lot, but his takedown defense and his wrestling is still bad. And I think that in this fight, more than anything, his offense is going to lead him right into getting taken down. And Rogerio de Lima, he has confidence issues that could really haunt him here, but I feel more like what is likely to be at play is that even if De Lima gets stung or if he doesn't like the way the fight's going, he's just going to be able to keep taking Kimball down, and he's going to be able to keep working him over from top control and maybe even submit him. And that is too big a skill disparity that I see for me to pick Kimball. I mean, the guy's obviously, Krylov has his own thing going on. Maybe this would be a Krylov-like performance from Kimball, because Kimball has a bit of the Krylov thing going too. But I don't see enough of the same kind of total total overriding willingness to chase after any kind of position at any time that Krylov has. Kimble, I think, wants to be much more of a striker. And I don't know. Lima he hits so hard, and if he can get takedowns and if he can get to submission positions, I don't trust Kimble to be able to fight out of it well enough for me to pick him. So I'm taking De Lima, and I am even potentially willing to take him by first round submission. So
it's weird, right? De Lima is actually a pretty good submission grappler, and yet it's like light heavyweight is a division in which Nikita Krylov goes in and just submits everyone. It's a strange place, you know?
Yeah. I think that De Lima's too powerful for Kimble to fight as wild as he does. And I also think that because De Lima, because he has confidence problems, he's actually a pretty willing to shoot in on takedowns, and he hits them pretty well. Like, he doesn't just stand and trade. He's like, oh, I got hit. Well, I better rush in and take you down then.
Yeah. And the biggest flaw with Kimble is that he is laughably easy to take down.
Exactly. So I can even just see De Lima just taking him down over and over and riding out an ugly win that way.
Could be, yeah. I think you might be onto something.
De Lima is the favorite, opening at -170, now -178. Kimble opening at +130, now at +151. I feel like, let's see. Kimble, let's see. Would you bet, there's no Kimble. Oh, Kimble inside the distance is +320. I would potentially look at that.
Maybe. Yeah, I was really hoping we'd have some value on the total here, but under 1.5 rounds is the only one I would bet on, and it's -170.
Yeah, I would actually maybe say Kimble inside the distance +320 might be a chance to take, because De Lima is such a glass cannon, such a if I do not succeed early, I will fail miserably fighter. That may be.
Could be something. Yeah, I think De Lima, the idea of him losing his conditioning and his heart to the point where he doesn't get finished is actually pretty unlikely. Now that I think about it, like, if De Lima does falter after the first round, even with a guy who's not super dangerous, he probably will get knocked out or submitted, because that's just kind of what has happened to him throughout his career.
He just kind of seems to quit.
Yeah, but you know what the real basis was for this? And again, we shouldn't be talking about this fight this much, but De Lima lost to Mike Kyle. That was all the way back in 2011, but that's not a dissimilar type of opponent to Jeremy Kimble. It's like a guy who can't really grapple that well and just kind of throws a lot of punches, and De Lima lost a decision.
Big difference there is that Kyle was always big and hit hard, and Kimble is a undersized light heavyweight who is accurate and has snap on his strikes, but does not necessarily seem to hit quite as hard.
Yeah, it's like Maldonado. Like, Maldonado does not knock many people out. He hurts you, he wears on you, but it's different.
Yeah. That brings us to a middleweight bout: Eric Spicely versus Alessio Di Chirico. And I'm probably picking Di Chirico. Spicely is one of those fighters. He's a bit like Dan Kelly for me. I'm going to pick against him, and he may prove me wrong over and over again. But he's a universal underdog. He's going to be an underdog in just about every decently matched fight he gets. And he's got some danger because he's aggressively willing to pursue his game. And once you get above welterweight, that actually does a hell of a lot for you. Once you're below welterweight, you kind of have to have more tools, more to it than that. There has to be more strategy.
But in any division, being committed to what you do well is a surprisingly solid trait to have.
It is. I mean, it's always a good, solid, basic trait to have.
Yeah.
But it counts for a lot above welterweight. In middleweight,
Definitely.
light heavy, and heavyweight, it's like, oh wow, you're actually willing to just strike or just grapple or just wrestle and then work on other things.
North of
Amazing.
170 is the realm of specialists.
Yeah. So Spicely, I mean, that does something for him. Obviously, the Thiago Santos fight too. Santos apparently had injured his knee early in that fight, which may play a part in Spicely's surprising win and Santos's inability to concentrate on fighting off that rear naked choke. Chirico's just too well-rounded, too grounded. His wrestling and grappling games have always been pretty strong. They've never been a major weakness for him. His biggest weakness has been his ability to chain together all of his skills, and he's really gaining in that as time goes on. And I think he's the better athlete. He's the better striker. He's the better wrestler. And so it's really just, does he let himself get caught on the ground? And I'm not going to bet on that. So
yeah. I will always probably root for Eric Spicely.
Oh yeah.
Probably because he is an eternal underdog, and I think he appreciates that because his life is kind of an underdog story. I mean, if you know anything about his life story, I'm pretty sure like both of his parents were drug addicts or something, and he kind of like lived on his own from the time he was 16. And he's done really well for himself in MMA, perhaps because he takes that mentality into his fights, where there is nothing you can throw at Eric Spicely that's going to stop him from just relentlessly going for takedowns and relentlessly seeking to find an opportunity where he can use his excellent submission grappling game, which is really top notch. He's a very good submission artist. He's like a super low grade Khabib Nurmagomedov, I guess, in that way. He just keeps going for your hips. Guys like Spicely and like Cesar Ferreira and like Colby Covington, these are like the B class Khabib Nurmagomedovs. You know what I mean? But it works for them a lot of the time.
Khabib's American cousin Daryl Nurmagomedov.
Eric Nurmagomedov. Yeah, and Alessio Di Chirico, to compare him to another fighter, he's like one of these Francis Ngannous, who European fighter comes to the U.S. and is just surprisingly good at every aspect of MMA. Like Ngannou, a lot like Shelton too, he seems to be a really solid athlete. Not necessarily huge explosive power like Shelton and Ngannou possess, but definitely a natural ability to keep himself balanced and move very fluidly, and to seize on openings very quickly. He's got good eyes, good awareness, and he's definitely tough because that fight with Garrett McClellan turned into an unexpected banger, and Chirico came out on top. So he has some grit in him as well. I think he's just too well-rounded to beat Spicely. Of course, I said that about Thiago Santos. Spicely really is pretty hopeless on the feet to this day. But I will not count Eric Spicely out wholesale because he will continue to come for Alessio Di Chirico's hips with bad but continuous takedown attempts for every one of the 15 minutes he is given.
Well, it's a bit like Dan Kelly. It's sometimes these people just have a really good feel for fighting that carries over a lot better than the technical game. Like if you're tough and you have a good feel for the sport, that means a lot.
Now, unfortunately for Spicely, I think Di Chirico has a pretty good feel for fighting too, but also Di Chirico's not a finisher. So Spicely's probably going to get a lot of opportunities to keep pressing his advantages. So I think it should be an interesting fight.
Let's see the odds on this bout. Spicely coming in, opening at plus 115, now at minus 118. Di Chirico opening at minus 155, now minus 104.
Wow.
So Di Chirico actually moved into underdog status, and while I don't agree, I mean, if he keeps moving further into being the underdog, I think he's worth a bet.
I'd bet on him around like plus 150, but other than that, it's not. I don't know enough about Di Chirico to be really confident in him yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Well, otherwise too, it's just as you say, he's not a finisher, and he's facing somebody who's a pretty good grappler, and that in and of itself means that
who is a finisher with his grappling too. Like if someone's going to get a finish, it's probably going to be Spicely.
Yeah, so you don't really want, especially at even odds, it's not worth a bet. If Spicely, if Di Chirico keeps climbing, that I think is worth something.
Yep.
But not right now. Right now, it's just It could easily be a very ugly fight, and the odds are reflective of that.
Chirico by decision is plus 210.
The Chirico by decision is plus 210.
Yeah.
Well,
that's maybe worth considering.
That's worth considering. The other part of that, unfortunately, is that Spicely doesn't take punches all that well.
Yeah. So maybe if he doesn't get his grappling to work, the Chirico will become a finisher.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on it too much. It's not that big a fight.
No.
Not a fight with easy parameters.
No. That brings us to a light heavyweight bout: Luis Henrique da Silva versus Jordan Johnson, the Big Swingin' Johnson of Big Swingin' Johnson fame.
It's Frank Waston versus Big Swingin' Johnson. It's probably the greatest fight on this entire card. I'll ride with Frank Waston to the end of my life. He is amazing. He's just a super exciting fighter who constantly manages to shock his opponents, in part because he's always getting nearly knocked out and then coming back to win. He's awesome. He's great. Very dangerous striker, southpaw with heavy kicks, a good uppercut and straight left, really, really good body knees in the clinch, and a pretty good scrambly, aggressive submission game. I don't think he'll ever be a really top-notch grappler because I don't think he controls position all that well, but he has a nose for finishes in basically any position. And then Jordan Johnson making his UFC debut. Unfortunately for Luis Henrique da Silva, specializes in the one thing that Frank Waston's probably worst at, which is takedowns. He's a guy with a wrestling background. And like you said, the bigger you get, the more it pays off to have a specialization like that. And that is how Jordan Johnson's been winning his fights, is just grinding people out. And to his credit, he hits pretty hard too. So he's got quite a few TKOs from those grounded positions, does good damage against the fence. And unfortunately from a man, Frank Waston, I think he's going to end up in a lot of those bad positions. I mean, for one, he allows himself to be tied up in the clinch a lot. It's a position he usually has a strength in, but I'd be kind of surprised if Johnson couldn't find his back or get to his hips from that position. And then two, because Frank Waston's always coming forward, he's open to reactive shots, and Johnson's a big, strong, powerful guy who doesn't seem to have problems with jiu-jitsu players. So I would love to pick Frank Waston, but I think I'm going to go with Jordan Johnson, and I think it might be a late TKO.
Yeah, that's all pretty much mirrors my thoughts on this. The other part of that, too, I will say, is that in brief flurries, when he's pressing, Johnson also has pretty decent functional boxing.
Yeah.
He's got a good understanding of the openings in front of him. He punches to the body. He has reasonably fast hands with some pop in them.
He's certainly not as specialized as a guy like Spicely.
Yeah, he understands enough of the fundamentals to generally stay safe in exchanges and to do a little damage as he's coming in for takedowns. And yeah, it just feels like one of those fights that is just going to be all about Johnson winning the positioning battle over and over and over again, and Henrique's jiu-jitsu not being potent enough from the bottom to win very brief openings before giving up things like top ride and, you know, cradle and stuff like that, where Johnson just picks up too many nuances in his wrestling game. You know, you see some of his takedowns where he'll be like, he'll have a hook in, an underhook, and then he'll just grab an ankle and like pull out the guy's ankle while twisting him down with the underhook.
Chain wrestling is really, like, he has a lot of layers to his wrestling that makes him really effective. That being said, Frank Waston, anywhere north of like plus 150 is almost always worth a little tiny bet, because Jordan Johnson's inexperienced. He can be hit. And Frank Waston is a maniac. He went in and submitted Joachim Christensen. He knocked out Jonathan Wilson. He's a dangerous dude. So, and always looking for the finish.
On that note, Frank Waston is opened at plus 125, now to plus 181. And Jordan Johnson at minus 165, now out to minus 221. Let's see. Silva inside the distance is plus 300. I would probably, I mean, you could probably just go, if the odds on him here keep climbing, you could just go with a straight bet on him. But I think if he's winning this, he's probably gonna have to finish it. like I don't see him controlling rounds.
Yeah. Unless he could be the guy who just hits the bigger shots and gets a lot of damage, but it's not a safe way to win rounds. I think, yeah, him by finish or just the straight odds. I got him at around plus 200, and I think that's around the region that is favorable. But again, it is a pick against my intuition because I do think he will lose the fight.
I think Henrique will lose the fight too. So do not bet a lot on the idea of him being an underdog here.
Yeah, just playing the odds.
Yeah, it's not worth a lot. It's just getting into, when you get into the light heavyweight and heavyweight, anytime guys start to get separated by more than a 200, that's when you really want to look and be like,
I mean, yeah.
How much do I really believe in this person?
Especially when it's a guy like Frank Waston. You put a Frank Waston or like a Mike Perry or an Alex Nicholson against a newcomer. I'm pretty much always going to. A crazy brawler will always get a small amount of money from me, and they very often pay off because the odds are so good.
Yeah. That brings us to a welterweight bout, Bobby Nash versus Li Jingliang. And I feel a little bad for Connor here because I honestly think this might be a crazy bad fight. Like, I hate to diss his boy Li Jing here, but he's still he's had to adapt his game so much to the UFC that I feel like he's constantly, it's like whack-a-mole. And I've seen this with other fighters that I really like, that it'll be like, oh, I got to the UFC and suddenly what I was good at doesn't work at all anymore. And so they change tactics and they try to build totally new skill sets. And it's just this constant chasing of gaps that keep opening up as they try to do different things and find out what they don't know in that area.
It's a futile arms race.
Yeah, because Jingliang really, he came up in the Chinese regional scene as a controlling grappler. Like, there was a reason he was nicknamed the Leech, and it was because he was the kind of dude who would run up on you, grab you, work back control even before he got you down, and just sort of suck you to the ground and try and drain all the energy out of you. And in the UFC, his wrestling and grappling weren't good enough for that. And so he's become a surprisingly decent boxer. But we even saw, in his fight with Anton Zafir, he got taken down a couple of times. Suddenly it's just well, now you have a new hole opening up. You're a boxer with no takedown defense whatsoever. And but Nash is not a wrestler, and he's not a very good striker. He's a very he hits with, he's got natural power because his arms are huge. He's got those freaky giraffe arms that
he has, that Conor McGregor build where he has long limbs and a thick upper body, but a really narrow waist. He's got these kind of whipping shots that he lands.
Yeah, so he's got really good natural power, which is why he's got so many finishes. And he's got a very confident guard game. But he's not a good wrestler, and he's not a creative or especially advanced striker. He's just and he wants to strike, which is going to make this fight really weird. He's not somebody that wants to suck you into his guard and then play a guard game. He wants to stay in boxing range and throw single shots or 1-2s at you to see if he can knock you out. And Jingliang is a better boxer, but he doesn't have a lot of power. And I don't know. This could just be an ugly mess of a fight. I might pick Jingliang because Nash's game is so limited to these few things that he does kind of okay and depends on his natural athleticism to carry him through. But Jingliang is also, he just seems like he may never quite have what he needs to be a continually winning fighter in the UFC. Any good athlete is going to beat him. And Anton Zafir only being incredibly chinny is what may have saved him in that fight.
Although I would wager that he would have probably taken over that fight anyway. I think.
Yeah, he probably would have. Zafir is just not very good, but I'm going to pick Jingliang here, but I'm not going to do it happily or easily, and I think this could just be an ugly, terrible fight if it ends up with, I don't know, if Jingliang gets hit by hard shots and decides he doesn't want to engage that much, this could be a god-awful fight.
I for one, I struggle to see Li Jingliang getting hit by a shot and deciding I don't want to keep fighting. I think the best thing about him, I will just make an endless loop of Joe Louis comparisons because I guess I'm in a comparison mode today, but also I'm constantly making this comparison for a few reasons. One, Li Jingliang's a dead ringer for Joe Louis. He looks exactly like him. He really does. Like, their faces are identical. It's very striking to me. As a huge Joe Louis fan, I've always found it to be fascinating. But his style, too, he has a lot of the same problems and strengths as Joe. Now, one, he doesn't have the huge knockout power that Joe Louis had, which is a problem. As you said, he does have some snappy punches and everything, but Joe Louis could always turn a guy's lights off with a single shot, and his whole style was built around that. So Li Jingliang is coming from a different place, but he does have a thing that Joe had where he's not a particularly great mover. He's kind of foot slow. And so he knows that his best opportunity is to fight at a middle distance, to basically keep himself right on the edge of punching range, use his head movement and his quick punches, angle around the person, and basically, rather than navigating the cage, he kind of navigates his opponent. And the problem with that approach is that, like we've seen it with a lot of guys, usually with pressure fighters, you're hittable when you stand close, and you need to be a good adjuster to cope with it. So he's kind of similar in that way to Tomas Almeida, who comes out, he's right in range, he knows what his best range is, and he wants to start applying that pressure immediately. But for the first 4 minutes of the fight, he hasn't quite read his opponent yet. And so if they go for a reactive takedown, he's close enough to get hit by it. And if they go for a counter right hand, he's probably going to eat it. But as the fight goes on, I think Li Jingliang is pretty good. That's why I say I think he would have always beaten Anton Zafir, even if he hadn't gotten that knockout, because by the end of that fight, when he was about to knock Zafir out, he was also taking him down and stopping his takedowns. Yeah. He had already adapted to what Zafir was showing him. And that was also the case in the Keita Nakamura fight. He got caught with a shot early, smothered on the ground, and then came back really strong and would have won the fight if not for Nakamura's brilliant opportunistic grappling. So, he's got that going for him. Bobby Nash, like you said, solid guy, athletic, powerful, has a lot of potential, but I don't really see what stands out about his game from a philosophical perspective yet. I don't know what the philosophy of his game is. What's his process? What's the direction he's trying to take his fights in? Not really sure.
Yeah, he wants to box. That's the weird thing. He's not a good boxer, but I think the natural power he has made him want to box. Like, he wants to be right in front of the person in a boxing match, which is why I'm willing to give Jingliang the credit that he's probably going to win this fight, because he's tough, and I don't see Nash's boxing being overwhelming.
Yeah, I go back to Nash's fight with Angelo Trevino. You can find footage of that on YouTube. Trevino is a guy who has some decent skills, hasn't really made much of a career for himself, but there's a point in that fight after Nash lands his shots in the first round where Trevino starts pressuring. Not crazy, but he gets close, he makes Nash back up, and he keeps stinging him with these little straight leads. And Nash gets hurt, and he looks shaken, and he lands a big shot in an exchange, and it changes the fight. So that could definitely happen, but against a more experienced, more practiced fighter who will set that distance and stick you on the end of punches and throw a much higher volume, I think that's a recipe for success. So I like the Leech, but then again, the Leech is one of my favorite fighters, so take it with a grain of salt. Nash could definitely knock him out at any moment because Li Jingliang has been hurt and hit several times in his short UFC career. So
he's going a really hard path, which is the lightweight volume striker. That's the flip side of under 172 is or 170 and under is that it's really tough to be a dude who just works a points game, and that's like all you do is you just stay active and stay busy, and you're not going to finish. It's really hard to survive like that and be tough and just make that work for you in the lower weight classes, because most people get there by being more dangerous. Most people get there because they have the power to change fights. So
he'll probably the best possible outcome for Li Jingliang is probably to be in a sort of a John McDessie role. You know, an exciting gatekeeper who, people who are more well-rounded are going to beat him. But I don't know. Nash is not more well-rounded. He's just maybe more dangerous.
The odds on this, Jingliang is the favorite, opening at -170, now to -148. And Nash opening at +130, now to +125. I suppose if it gets much closer, then you should bet on Jingliang.
Maybe. I wouldn't bet on this fight, to be honest.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. It's not really a good fight for that, and it's too unpredictable.
Yeah,
frankly. So I don't see anything in the odds right there, and they haven't moved that much. Bantamweight bout now: Raphael Assuncao, Aljamain Sterling.
One of my other favorites. I love Raphael Assuncao. I think he's great, man, and he just does not get the respect he deserves as clearly one of the top 5 bantamweights in the world. I mean, there's only the very best in this division beat Raphael Assuncao. And it's a tough comeback fight for Aljamain Sterling. I have a feeling that with all of the shit he's talked towards the UFC, much of it deserved, the UFC is probably saying to themselves, all right, well, it's time to shit or get off the pot. We're going to decide right now if Aljamain Sterling is a contender or not, because at this point, the UFC has an embarrassment of riches in the bantamweight division. They have so many guys right now who are coming up through the division and raring for a shot at the title in the near future. You know, guys like Jimmy Rivera, Cody Garbrandt already made it, but also Thomas Almeida. There are lots. I'm blanking right now, but there are a lot of bantamweight contenders. Aljo Sterling's one of them. And man, Raphael Assuncao, the thing is I can see one area in which Aljamain Sterling, 2 areas in which Aljamain Sterling has an advantage. The one is that he throws a lot of kicks. It's pretty much all he throws in the striking is kicks. And Raphael Assuncao has always been vulnerable to kickers. He eats head kicks. He gets kicked in the legs, like in the Pedro Munoz fight. He does not deal with that as well as he does with boxing because he is primarily a boxer in his striking. He likes to pick off counter shots, hard right hands, uppercuts, things like that. And he likes knees and things, but mostly short range, mid range stuff. The problem is that Aljamain Sterling doesn't throw enough kicks because it's hard to throw enough kicks. It's really hard to fight with a style that relies on them because a kick takes about 5 times as much energy as a punch. You know, a hard right hand with all my power in it, I can throw 100 hard right hands and be as tired as if I threw 20 tie kicks on a bag. It's just, it takes a lot of energy to throw your whole body around. And so Aljamain Sterling maybe throws like 15 good kicks around, whereas Raphael Assuncao throws at a pretty good clip. Even as mostly a counterpuncher, he puts his combinations together because he keeps his distance. He's very confident in knowing how far away he needs to be to avoid a clean strike. So he's always there ready to respond. The other advantage for Aljo Sterling is, of course, his grappling, but it's not as big an advantage in this matchup as it would be elsewhere because Raphael Assuncao is a very good submission grappler. He's also a phenomenal counter wrestler. Good takedown artist in his own right, but really good at stopping takedowns. And so if we use MMA math, which is not always useful, it didn't work out last time I tried to use it for the Diego Sanchez fight or for the Marcin Held fight. But if we use MMA math here, Raphael Assuncao outclassed Brian Caraway with ease, and Aljamain Sterling had a really tough fight with him. One that he didn't easily lose, but a very back and forth fight. And
one that he lost. He did lose it.
He did lose it, yeah. I mean, it wasn't like an embarrassing loss. He had a case, but he lost it.
He lost it, yeah.
So I just see Aljamain Sterling having trouble getting Assuncao into those positions where he can hit reactive takedowns and start working his transitional grappling. And I have trouble seeing him hanging with Assuncao on the feet when Assuncao is so much better defensively and offensively. So I think it's a tough one for Aljamain Sterling, and I think Raphael Assuncao is a fairly easy pick, which it hurts to say because I really like Aljo. I want to see good things for him, but I have trouble seeing him beating Raphael Assuncao.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with the potential that the UFC is just partially maybe in a bed of Aljamain Sterling's own making, saying, well, if you're talking all this shit, you made us negotiate with you like you're a top bantamweight in the world,
right?
Then go win a title. We will
tuck in, motherfucker. You made the bed. Time to lay down.
Put you in fights that are title shot contender fights. If you do not win them, you're done.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Sterling, part of this too is that even when he came in, there was always this feeling that Sterling's game is going to have to not change fundamentally, but grow in dramatic ways that it hasn't, and it's really hard for fighters to do that. I mean, one of the things I've come to more and more of a realization of over time is that fighters rarely improve in the way that fans want them to improve. They rarely are like, oh, well, if he just got some better striking or learned some better head movement, or, if he just got his grappling game together or his wrestling game together, so-and-so would be amazing. It's like that. That's rarely how people actually tend to get better. They tend to stick with the fights the style that they know how to do.
And that has to do with what you were saying before. Like, I think that's actually a really good thing, that when fighters do get better, it's because they expand on their strengths. And I think we may be on the cusp of a new wrestlers revolution in MMA. We have a lot of up and coming prospects who are takedown artists first and foremost. But I think there are two ways you have to go with that style from what I've seen so far. You got to either become a much better striker. If you're going to be this kicker, this guy who wrestles, you got to be a much better striker to set up your reactive shots, a la Yair Rodriguez. Or you've got to pressure like crazy and pursue those takedowns as much as possible, like Khabib Nurmagomedov or like Mirsad Bektic. And if you're going to be caught in the middle where you're kind of waiting for them to take you down, but you're not really threatening them on the feet, you give a guy like Raphael Assuncao so much time to figure you out.
Well, and Sterling just doesn't. I mean, he doesn't have the cardio to fight the way he does. And it especially doesn't help that his footwork is not efficient at all. So not only is he throwing a lot of big kicks, but in that Caraway fight, every time Caraway threw a punch at him, Sterling took like 5 steps back.
Yeah, he's not comfortable at all in boxing distance.
Yeah. And so it's really hard to see, especially because he's so uncomfortable in boxing distance that he often takes himself even out of kicking range. So not only is he not comfortable, not only is most of his offense on his feet through his kicking game, he's not in range to land anything.
Right.
He'll just throw a snapping front kick that is like, it goes like right here in front of somebody's face. And it's like, yeah, that looked really cool and it would have been dangerous if it landed, but you're not landing these things.
Yeah, and the pressure of Caraway was the real eye opener. I mean, the saving grace is that Assuncao's not probably going to pressure Sterling the way Caraway did, but he's also a much better striker than Caraway.
Much better,
as we saw in their fight.
Yeah, so it's really hard. Even if Sterling came out surprised Assuncao, because Assuncao hadn't done his homework, or had done his homework and was going to counterfight anyway. Even if Sterling came out and really surprised Assuncao for the first round, it's hard to see somebody who gets taken down as rarely as Assuncao does, ceding momentum as the fight goes on, in the same way that I expect Sterling to, with an energy-burning, inefficient striking style if he's stuck out at range.
Maybe it's that one of MMA's golden rules. If you are better in your opponent's area of strength than they are in yours, you tend to win the fight. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And Assuncao's more comfortable with his wrestling and his submission grappling, definitely, than than Sterling is with his boxing.
Yep. So the odds on this, Sterling is the underdog, opening at -120, now up to +122. And Assuncao is the favorite, opening at -120, now at -147. I think
Hoffa's worth a bet, honestly.
Yeah, before he gets much wider, he's worth a bet at those odds.
Close to -100 is pretty good on this fight, I think.
I wouldn't bet any over-unders or anything like that. Assuncao is not a good finisher, and he's tough as hell. And Sterling is a decent finisher, but only with his submission grappling, which is where Assuncao is least likely to get finished.
Yep.
That brings us to the final prelim, Nate Marquardt versus Sam Alvey.
Starting to get excited now, Zane. Come on, you got to get hyped up for this one.
Man, I'm a little hyped for this one, and I'm picking Sam Alvey first and foremost. Partially because Marquardt is in that one of those career stages where it's just like, I don't care. I'm not going to pick you. I know what the matchups are like. We knew he could easily beat Tamden McCrory. We
should have fucking picked him, dude. We said it so much. We're like, this is a bad matchup for Tamden McCrory.
Yeah. Like, this is a really bad matchup for Tamden McCrory. Nate Marquardt has just the style to beat Tamden McCrory. And we still picked Tamden McCrory.
Which shows the risks of that mindset. You know, the Diego Sanchez's, the Nate Marquardts, the Dan Andersons.
Yeah, well, and that's the price you got to pay, I think, for trying to do the job at some point, for trying to do the job right, for being
pointless
the first
job that we do,
for being the first on the bandwagon and the first off it. That's the, or is it the last on and the first off? Maybe that's it.
Last on and first off. Haven't quite jumped on the Aljamain Sterling bandwagon. Very quickly got off the Nate Marquardt bandwagon.
Yeah, and that's kind of how you got to be if you really want to be consistent, reasonably consistent. And Marquardt still, like, even in the McCrory fight, he still had, like, if he can still be stung. But and Alvey's not Tamden McCrory. He has some of the same problems in that he will just wait at range a bit, but he doesn't have the same stock still stiffness, total just chin out there to be hitness that Tamden has.
He's also tougher than Tamden. He can take a better shot.
Yeah, he can take a better shot. And I think Marquardt, the X factor here is that Marquardt is very willing to wait for his shots in a way that could make this just an ugly ass fight and play on all of Sam Alvey's prototypical problems. But I think at some point Marquardt has to pressure. He has to offer something, and when he does that, I don't trust him to keep from getting clipped. And that's it. I mean, that's really all it comes down to. The flip side of that is that if Alvey cannot hit Marquardt hard enough to hurt him and to knock him out, then Alvey may just lose. But I liked what I saw in his Nicholson fight. Alvey looked like he actually may have learned something about his own tendencies and really tried to pressure. And when he pressured, he forced Nicholson to brawl with him. And when Nicholson brawled with him, he was able to beat Nicholson with his counter game.
Yeah, it obviously wasn't as grand, but it reminded me, or I suppose the Cub Swanson Duha Choi fight reminded me of that, where this old veteran, this experienced veteran decides that maybe it's not right now. It's not about being more technical. I got to bite down and go after this guy to beat him. Prove something. And yeah, he did it. It's something he has consistently not been able to do. So he was losing the Nicholson fight and then went after Nicholson and turned it around.
This is still one of those fights that, 7 years ago, I would pick Nate Marquardt to win it every single day of every week.
But 7 years ago is a long, long time.
Yeah.
In this sport, that's an eternity.
Yeah. You can see too, all of Nate Marquardt's recent wins are either it's extremely powerful finishes. His last decision win is Dan Miller in 2011. And I think that Alvey's too tough and too dangerous on the counter, and Nate Marquardt is going to have to give him something to win this fight. Unless it just is the most boring range points fight from performance from Marquardt that we can imagine.
Yeah, you know what? You know what was so are you're going with Alvey?
I'm going with Alvey. I think Marquardt, even when he dives in, he commits too much to stay away from Alvey. That's what it really is. Is that he really dives in with big power shots. He's not out there to play a range, jabbing and sort of just outside careful game.
Yeah, you can't take too much away from statistics, but I always use Fight Metric and stuff like that as a supplement for my analysis. And one statistic really shocked me actually, is that Nate Marquardt statistically lands 33% fewer significant strikes per minute than Sam Alvey. And that is not a great position to be in because Sam's kind of renowned for his tentativeness and how little he throws. That could be a good thing for Nate Marquardt because it could mean he's going to shock Sam Alvey with these quick single strikes, because in the Dan Henderson progression of turning into an old veteran who knocks people out, Marquardt is a little different than Dan. He's his chin is worse than Dan's became. His chin is completely fragile and cracked, but he's also a lot more mobile and fast than Dan Henderson ever was. And so if Nate Marquardt takes this fight and he moves around a lot, he basically treats it like the CB Dalloway fight and makes Sam Alvey come at him and then stings him with big shots and gets out of dodge, he could definitely win this fight. That's an opportunity for him. But also not throwing very much, throwing less than a Sam Alvey who is willing to come after you and who still has that counter right hook cocked and loaded is also kind of bad. Not being able, because typically the way you beat Sam Alvey is to pepper him without diving into range. And so Marquardt will basically be torn between doing nothing and probably getting picked apart a little bit and lunging in, possibly doing big damage, but possibly exposing himself to a counter as well. So I think Alvey by decision. I don't think it'll be a particularly fun fight, but it's pretty tense because both these guys are dangerous. And, I have a fondness for both of them. So I'm hoping I'll be pleased if either guy gets a big emphatic win. I really will. Yeah. But I think Alvey by decision is the most likely.
It sucks picking Sam Alvey fights because it is so like his game is so singular and like plannable,
Yeah. He's a perfect gatekeeper in that way. And yet he's game enough to still be a little unpredictable. Like you can perfectly predict Sam Alvey, what he's going to do. Even then, he's going to go out there and guillotine Eric Spicely. And you're like, holy shit, Sam Alvey, he just pulls stuff up from up in his sleeve sometimes.
Yep. All right. The odds on that fight, Alvey is the favorite opening at -185, closing up to -151. Marquardt, the underdog, opening at +145, now at +126. I'm not surprised those odds are closing. I don't know that I would bet on this fight. I can't think of a really good bet to make on this fight because they're both really powerful and really inactive. And so you really
and Alvey inside distance is only +100. Marquardt inside distance is +350. I may actually place a small sum on that, but that's because I'm a fool and I would not advise anyone else to do so.
Yeah, it just seems like kind of an unbettable fight to me.
Yeah,
frankly, almost whatever the odds were, unless they were just outlandishly high on one of them, it would be a practically unbettable fight. It's just Alvey is too limited and Marquardt is too far past his prime. That brings us to a featherweight bout: Alex Caceres versus Jason Knight.
Fight of the night right here. I love it. It's probably the most guaranteed action fight on the card because at least if Jason Knight's last two performances are an indication.
Jason Knight's kind of not going to show up any different. So,
I mean, well, we say that. I mean, before his last two fights, he was pretty much regarded as a guard-based submission artist,
a guard puller.
Which was like the worst strategy in the world to take in his debut against Tatsuya Kawajiri. But now he's just like South Florida's Diaz brother, where he's just kind of a maniac who goes after people and scowls and takes punches and throws pretty a lot like the Diaz brothers. Offensively, his boxing's pretty good. And his game is built well with his boxing because even when he's getting hit, he comes back with a lightning fast 1-2 pretty much every time. So it's hard to even go in there and confidently hit him. The target's there, but you know what I mean? It's like jousting at a quintain you're going to hit it, but that thing is going to whack you in the back of the head every time you score. It's tough. And Alex Caceres, always exciting, always unreliable. The only thing you can count on from Alex Caceres is that you cannot predict which version of Alex Caceres will show up. I had to do some guesswork, basically some hypothesizing when in doing this preview and doing my research for this, trying to figure out what the deal is with Alex Caceres, and I still don't know.
I think he's just kind of a head case, honestly.
Yeah, my best guess is that there's some kind of confidence issue going on with Caceres where, from what I can tell, he fights really, really well. He's obviously got skill when he feels he has the initiative, when he feels like the bigger guy, when he feels like he can set the distance, when he feels in control, he lets it go and he's creative and interesting. And that's why I think the best portions of his fight with Yair Rodriguez are when he was pressuring, because that was when Rodriguez was shutting down. And so Caceres had a surge of confidence and started putting his shots together. But when he doesn't feel in control, when his opponent's bigger than him or when they're really aggressive, his hit ability and his lack of durability, all of that becomes a really big issue, and he kind of shuts down, which to me, that's the only thing that really explains the fight with Cole Miller, in which Alex Caceres can come out against a flat Cole Miller and look astounding, and then come out against a vaguely frustrated Cole Miller and get shit kicked for a round. It's insane. He's a very dichotomous individual.
Yeah.
But if it does come down to initiative and control, Jason Knight's a tough one for him, because he's probably going to be coming after him and throwing punches and going for takedowns constantly. And Caceres is a really good opportunist. I could definitely see him finding a guillotine or a rear naked choke in a scramble. And Jason Knight's hittable, but Caceres isn't super powerful. So unless it's a submission, it's hard for me to see Caceres racking up enough points or doing enough damage to win 2 of 3 rounds. So I think Jason Knight by decision in what will probably be a banger. Must also be said, Caceres should count himself lucky that Knight is not much of a knockout puncher either.
Yeah.
If he was, I'd probably pick him by an early knockout. But as it is, I think it'll be a back and forth fun fight in which Jason Knight's pressure and volume are the deciding factors.
Yeah, the biggest question for me here, I think, that I have is how much of Jason Knight's success is down to the level of competition he's facing as well. Like guys who just cannot either cannot hang with him athletically or technically. Because Jim Ehlers, as much as I like Jim Ehlers and Dan Hooker, I like both these fighters. They both have extreme limitations to their game. Ehlers being an exceptionally wooden striker who is really not comfortable in a firefight and took Knight to a split decision by just being more powerful, and hitting him harder for every shot that Knight landed. And Hooker being really under athletic and not nearly the striker that people want him to be.
He also took a very strange tack in that fight where he opted to be sort of a long-range southpaw outboxer, which is not his typical style. But I wonder if that was a training camp adaptation to what they saw from Knight against Ehlers. And that kind of makes me think that, on the one hand, Hooker's normal style would have him wading in and clinch fighting and brawling with Knight. And maybe they thought that's not a great idea because Knight's tough and dangerous. So let's fight him from range. Problem is if you're not really comfortable, it takes a lot of cool to fight from distance. It takes a lot of composure to be able to do that, to keep your eyes on the opponent, not flinch, time them perfectly. And if it's not your natural style to do that, if you don't have that cool, then Knight will probably get to you the way he got to Hooker. And I think that might be the case with Caceres, which is why I like Knight.
But it's also, but there's a bit of me that's kind of like, well, is Knight like? I mean, he has a more varied and better, more active boxing game than Mike Perry. But it's kind of like there's a part of me that feels like is Jason Knight Mike Perry without the absurd athletic upside? At which point, like, how much can he wade in with his chin up, eating shots? And how much has his ability to do that so far been dictated by fighting guys who threw not a lot or were not comfortable.
Oh, it'll bite him someday for sure. Somebody's going to knock Jason Knight out bad, but I just don't know. I mean, I try not to be too precious with my favorites. Like I picked against Frank Waston earlier, even though I love him dearly. But I just don't think Caceres is probably the guy.
Yeah, that's more than anything. Caceres has in fact not knocked anyone out since 2010. Kedema Jamal McClellan.
He's had a few, I think maybe in the Damasio Page fight. Did he fight Damasio Page?
Yeah, in 2012.
I think he knocked him down before submitting, and he had some really good boxing in that fight. But again, Page showed up flat and wasn't going after Caceres, and that's why he was allowed to shine.
Caceres is...
He's super interesting, man. He's a confounding fighter.
Such a strange fighter, and I hate picking against him in this fight because I feel like Knight is really setting himself up to be picked apart and totally dismantled by a more technical fighter at some point. And it should be Alex Caceres. It should be Alex Caceres like he was against Cole Miller, darting in and out, cutting angles, and just boxing the shit out of him.
He totally has the skills to do it. It's the matter of composure. Does he have the mind to do it?
Yeah, and you're right not to trust that. So Jason Knight by decision feels fair.
I'll be happy to see Caceres win because at some point they're going to cut Alex Caceres and that'll suck. I want him to get as many losses as he wants and just to be a fun, exciting, interesting fighter. And Jason Knight is a great
action fighter. He is the prototype of what you want out of an action fighter.
Yeah, and charismatic and likable. Caceres is great. And Jason Knight won't be cut if he loses. So I am hoping in part for a Caceres win, but I just don't trust him.
Knight opened at -155, has basically stayed there. Caceres opened at +115, is now at +129. Don't bet on this fight as long as Jason Knight is the favorite.
There's no real value.
That's it. And that brings us to a heavyweight bout. Andrei Arlovski versus Francis Ngannou. There are two simple truths to know about this fight going into it. In fact, three simple truths if we want to get really specific. One, Andrei Arlovski is an underrated wrestler. He's actually pretty decently above average as a wrestler for the heavyweight division. Average being bad. Most heavyweight wrestling is just terrible.
I mean, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time was Josh Barnett, and he would probably be embarrassingly bad with his takedowns if he were a featherweight.
Yeah. There are way too many guys that bend at the lower back to hit a single leg and just pull a single leg out from under their opponent, and the guy.
Some of it is maybe not bad wrestling. And things are different at heavyweight. Big dudes, even in the Olympics, big dudes wrestle a lot differently than little flyweights.
The physics of being 265 pounds and 6'5" make for a different wrestling experience. That is perhaps more fair to say.
More of an emphasis on upper body wrestling and stuff like that.
Yeah. Andrei Arlovski is an above average wrestler for the heavyweight division. He has not had a submission win since Tim Sylvia in 2005.
Which was an ankle lock, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, an Achilles lock.
Not a common one.
His chin has improved from its terrible period, but has slowly been regressing as he has faced actually consistently good strikers. Basically, his recent run against Miocic and Overeem, really, just those two, he got knocked out by both of them because they're both actually pretty decent strikers, more so than anyone he faced before that, including Antonio Silva and Travis Brown.
And Josh Barnett, who hurt him several times and is not a bad boxer.
Yeah. Ngannou is still not the best defensive wrestler in the world, but he is ridiculously hard to hold down for a heavyweight. And I think that's really all there is to it. Ngannou's going to win by knockout. So,
yeah, to me, the simple truth of this fight kind of ruined the romance because there's a part of me that can see Andrei Arlovski knocking Francis Ngannou out. And I think that's actually a very real possibility because Ngannou is super inexperienced. And if we're talking about Jason, the level of competition over which Jason Knight has gotten his wins, let's talk about Francis Ngannou's competition. When the best dude you've ever beaten is Anthony Hamilton, it's a big leap to go to Andrei Arlovski. Even an Andrei Arlovski on a 3-fight skid is a hell of a leap. And for inexperienced fighters, there are a few things that consistently get to them. One of them is pressure. Guys who go out there and pressure or just brawl tend to get to guys who don't have a ton of experience, but also crazy athleticism. I mean, we've probably all had, any of us who's ever trained, whether striking or jiu-jitsu or whatever, has probably experienced this feeling where you feel like you're doing pretty good. You know, maybe you're in your white belt class, you hit a scissor sweep. This happens to me, so I'll just tell the story. You hit a scissor sweep, you get an arm bar over another white belt. Guy's like, wow, good job. I'm like, wow, I feel really good about myself. End of round. Next round, you face a guy who's a former football player, and he Kimuras you 6 times in a minute. That happened to me, and that happens to young fighters as well. And especially with the striking speed, it's like, imagine Mike Perry fighting Tyron Woodley. He'd be shocked by the kind of speed and power Woodley can bring with a single punch. There's an adjustment period, even for good fighters, like Robbie Lawler with Woodley. And so for inexperienced fighters, the kind of speed and power that Andrei Arlovski can generate in an instant can be really, really surprising. And the kind of thing that you don't know how to react to it until it hits you. You learn what that's like by fighting it. And Arlovski's still incredibly fast and powerful. But the simple truth of the fight that really stands out to me is that Arlovski can't take a punch, and Francis Ngannou probably can.
His fight with Zumana Cisse, I'm sure you probably haven't seen it. Maybe you have, but
it's probably been a while. I think I saw it when I first researched him.
Cisse is a hard puncher. He's like the French. He's like a super cut rate Fedor, in the same body shape and size and winging wild punch style.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a decision. Like, Francis Ngannou can get wailed on a little.
Yeah, and just by virtue of like the natural parameters here, he's younger, he has less wear and tear, he's well conditioned. So those are the guys that don't get knocked out as easily. Andrei Arlovski is a guy who started with probably a suboptimal chin that has been eroded bit by bit over a very long career. The guy has been fighting for 2 decades.
Yep.
And you know, he still gets knocked out. I don't think he's super glass chinned, and he's fought through some hard shots lately. We know he can do it, but he can be knocked out, and Ngannou so far has not been. So, unfortunately, I think it comes down to the fact that Ngannou catches Arlovski in an exchange at some point. I think
also
that's what
part
happens.
of it too is that Arlovski lately seems to be suffering from maybe some renewed confidence issues,
and I think that's a big part of why the problem with his chin is, because his chin's suboptimal, which is not saying, it's not a great insult at heavyweight, because an average human chin is suboptimal for this division. But the guy can go in there for 3 rounds and not get knocked out by Anthony Johnson. But then he can get knocked out in an instant by Stipe Miocic, or instantly knocked down by Josh Barnett, guys who are not as hard of punchers as Anthony Johnson. So I think it does have to do with confidence. And for a while there, he was really getting his groove back. And now 3 fights losing streak, it's kind of gone again.
Yeah. He, like, especially I remember the Overeem fight, he really seems to be switching between being totally inactive outside and being wildly pressuring. Like, just let me just dive in and see if I can get this guy out of here in an instant. And if I can't, then I'm back to being totally inactive outside again.
And maybe some of it's style matchups too, because he and Overeem have both gone through a late career transformation of style at Jackson Winklejohn. It's worked really well for both of them. But maybe for Andre, if the guy doesn't come after him and let him counter, he kind of runs out of ideas. Like Frank Mir didn't want to go after Andrei Arlovski, and so nothing happened in the entire fight. And Arlovski's choice in a conflict like that is to change things up and go after the guy like you used to, which is what used to get you knocked out a lot, or to not do anything and kind of maybe lose a decision. So, and Ngannou does
not go after guys.
No, he's kind of a counterpuncher himself. So it could be a really bad fight. And I think it might be, but ultimately I think it'll just come down to Ngannou clipping Arlovski at some point in an exchange, and that'll end it.
Yep. Odds on that fight are the largest on the card. Ngannou is the favorite, opening at -350, now to -415. Arlovski opening at +250, now to +321.
Those are terrible odds. They should not be that wide.
Yeah, that's pretty wide.
Arlovski by TKO is +550. Like, it's not a likely outcome, but it's not a super unlikely outcome. It's Andrei Arlovski we're talking about here against a guy who's only been fighting for like 3 years.
Yeah, heavyweight, as we've said time and time again, is a division that you rarely want to see anyone separated by ±200, more than ±200.
Especially in a fight like this with so many unknowns. There's just too many. I think a chance bet on Arlovski by finish is a pretty good bet, actually.
Well, you know my rule. Don't bet on heavyweights.
Yeah. That's fine. Betting on heavyweights to kill each other or not kill each other is usually the safest way. Like betting totals.
Over a 1.5 rounds is +170.
That's a fucking bet.
Yeah.
That's a good bet.
Two guys who are very willing to be cautious for a while.
That's a bet right there. Yeah. This is actually a pretty bettable fight to me.
All right. I'm gonna let you be the one to give that advice.
Well, we'll be split advice for our viewers, so they can all just yell at me when they lose their mortgage and everything, and you can be blameless.
All right, and that brings us to a welterweight bout: Donald Cerrone versus Jorge Masvidal.
Great fight. Jorge Masvidal is a similar guy to Donald Cerrone in that he's really just kind of put in his time.
Is it Jorge? I thought he pronounces it George.
Does he? I thought it was Jorge because I don't think he's not Brazilian. He's not.
No, he's not, but I think that's how he pronounces it.
Could be. Maybe.
Anyway, whatever.
Might be one of those things where he was named Jorge and then it was just too difficult living in, I don't know, where did he live?
Florida? I doubt that.
No, come on. There's plenty of Jorges in Florida. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to say Jorge because that's how I've always said it.
Okay.
He's put in his time. He has developed his style through years of grinding, and he has consistently been unable to break through into the very upper tier of the division. Cerrone's ceiling is a little higher as established by his career. He's gotten to the title several times. Masvidal has kind of struggled to reach those heights. Aside from, I think, that one title shot against Gil Melendez in Strikeforce, in which, like Cerrone often did, he just didn't show up. He didn't really look like he wanted to be there. He kind of, and I think that's because Masvidal, we've talked about this a lot, both on Heavy Hands and on this show, about fighters like Masvidal who have these long careers and they grow up fighting grown men when they're still teenagers, and they become really good survivalists, and they become really good gamesmen, but they don't always become excellent winners. When it comes to snatching victory out of the hands of the opponent, something that Masvidal has consistently struggled with, just going after the guy. And unfortunately in this fight, I'm not sure that he could really beat Cerrone even if he went after him, because Masvidal is not a pressure fighter, and Cerrone's much better at dealing with pressure than he was before. We saw that in the Matt Brown fight. He's a lot more comfortable in the pocket. His boxing, his footwork, everything is getting better by little bits for Cerrone. And Masvidal's kind of the same guy. And, with Masvidal, that type of fighter is great. It's like Masvidal will be the ideal carnival fighter. You know what I mean? If he's like standing in the ring, he's like, all comers, taking all comers. I'll give you $100 if you can knock me out. He would knock everybody out because his style is perfectly well suited to facing someone that you haven't studied, you haven't prepared for. They're going to find it very difficult to get to you, and you will figure them out as the fight goes on. But against somebody that you have to prepare for, who has been studying you and who knows all your weaknesses, that really just makes you a survivalist and not a winner. And I think Cerrone has a big edge in kicking range in this fight, where Masvidal's best range is always when he's jabbing and keeping someone at bay. And Cerrone doesn't even have to walk in so far that he runs into the jab because he's a phenomenal kicker. And he's a better boxer than he used to be, which makes his kicks more dangerous. And he's got his wrestling to go to, although Masvidal is a really great wrestler too. So I think it'll be a close sort of chess match. I think it'll have a few exciting moments, and will be a good, intellectually satisfying fight, if not one that really gets the blood up. But I think Donald Cerrone will probably walk away with a decision.
Yeah, it feels like a fight that, to me. It's going to stay at a low simmer the whole fight. Like you're going to be waiting for it to boil the whole time, and it'll just never quite burst.
A good fight. It'll be like Dillashaw Assuncao 2. A good fight. A good performance from the guy who lost. You probably won't think about it too much after it's happened.
Yeah, because I mean, what we, Cerrone struggling with Matt Brown a bit, not a lot, but a bit.
Considerably, I think it was a tough fight for both guys.
Yeah, it was a tough fight.
You could have had Matt Brown up going into the third round. It was close enough for that.
Potentially. But a lot of that was based on Brown. I mean, part of it, Brown being tough, which Masvidal is certainly even tougher than Brown. But also Brown being his ideal being to really scrap it up with Cerrone and force Cerrone into this really brawling, ugly fight where Brown can thrive and get the clinch and make his clinch game work and make his aggression work for him, and that's just not Masvidal's game.
So against Brown, Cerrone had to fight for his ranges.
Yep.
And Masvidal's going to give him his ranges.
Exactly. So this could be a lot more like the Patrick Cote fight, except maybe without Cerrone getting his takedowns off, and with Masvidal being a lot more able to compete out at range.
Masvidal could have won this, by the way, if it was a long time ago, because he has a style not unlike that of Nate Diaz. But Cerrone is no longer, and also Masvidal hasn't totally gotten into Cerrone's head and made him fight like an idiot. So I expect the style matchup just not to favor him.
Yeah. So Don Cerrone just seems to be on a tear right now, and I don't think this is the fight to derail him. That said, Cerrone is the favorite, opening at minus 180, now at minus 156, and Masvidal opening at plus 140, now at plus 131. So not huge odd disparity there. I think Cerrone deserves to be a bit more of a favorite than that at this point with the way they fight and the way they match up. He might be a bet at minus 150, honestly. I think that's still close enough to say I think Cerrone's going to win this. I mean, Masvidal is not a great finisher.
No.
In general, against high-level opposition. He can finish, but he does not very often. And he has a habit of losing a lot of close decisions. So
even ones that people think he should have won, and that's kind of the central problem of Jorge Masvidal.
Yeah. So I think that Cerrone may be worth a straight bet at favorite odds there.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
That takes us to the main event, a women's bantamweight fight. Valentina Shevchenko versus Julianna Pena.
Title eliminator, not just a fight. Probably the next
eliminator.
Title
and so we have talked a lot about sick jitsu over the years on this show.
Yeah.
And did you see that tweet?
I did. We talked about it on Heavy Hands. That quote you posted on Twitter was everything we've said about sick jitsu has been kind of guesswork based on what we see from their fighters. Yeah. That is beyond anything we've ever said about them. Like the coach who runs the gym did more to discredit his striking training than anything we've ever seen from his fighters.
Yeah, because we've always said that they don't really have a fundamental striking game coming out of that camp. They don't seem to. Fighters in general, they don't seem to improve. Their striking doesn't improve over time, and they're not good defensive strikers. They don't have a good striking process.
Will you share with our viewers what the quote was?
So the quote that their head coach said is, you're not allowed to block a body punch in my gym. If you ask me how to block a body punch, I will tell you, essentially, that you're a sissy. I mean, he basically tell you that you need to toughen up. because you should never get dropped by a body punch. Body punches, getting dropped to body punches just shows mental weakness.
Yeah.
And
Essentially, blocking a body punch or checking a leg kick is a sign that you are a pussy and not a fighter. That's basically what Rick Little, that's how he views the striking arts.
Yeah, that was the essence of his quote. He added leg kicks in after that. If you don't ask me how to check a leg kick, that's you. If you're going down to a Charlie horse, then you're a sissy, basically. And so that explains why they never get any better at striking, because they are not really being taught how to strike. I cannot, and I'm sure this is wrong. I'm sure that there's a point out there to prove me wrong, but I cannot, other than Sam Sicilia having enough power to knock people out, remember a Sikjitsu fighter ever winning a stand-up battle.
Now, it is worth pointing out, before we go too far into that hole, because I'm totally with you, but Julianna Pena, who is the Sikjitsu fighter in this matchup, has been training at Valley Striking Systems, or Valley Flow Striking, which is Yair Rodriguez's striking coach. So she may be getting better. I'm not sure how long she's been there, but she hasn't yet.
And Yair's striking itself
is kind of specialized to Yair.
Yeah, it's not really replicable. You cannot really be a Taekwondo black belt who has insane cardio and just, let's just teach that.
Well, I talked about with Aljamain Sterling, like the kick-heavy wrestler. Grappler's a tough style. And I said, you could do this like Yair, but really the key to fighting like Yair Rodriguez is to be Yair Rodriguez. Yeah. That's the main element of his success, is just his innate talent.
And Peña has been fighting for 7 years now, going on 7 years, and her striking has not improved noticeably at any point. Question is, can she just run Valentina Shevchenko over and maul her? She might be able to. Shevchenko is not the best wrestler in the world. She's a better wrestler than you expect, with little foot sweeps and trips. But, even late in that fight, I believe Sarah Kaufman got her down and started working her over from top control a bit. She's not an amazing wrestler. And
she's the kind of fighter who tends to get better at everything they do as the fight goes on.
Yeah.
She's a very analytical, calculated fighter, but base level and she's also, it doesn't help that she's small for this division.
She's small for the division. So you have a fighter who has never shown any real striking ability and probably never will, against a undersized, but who's a powerful wrestler, not a great technical wrestler, but a powerful wrestler, against a fighter who is undersized and likes to strike a lot, but is not overpowering with their striking. And that makes for a really weird fight. I want Shevchenko to win because Peña's really not a very...
kind of a douche.
Kind of a douchebag.
Yeah.
Kind of a douchebag. And I have never liked Peña's game. I don't think she's terribly technical at anything. I don't think she's a great grappler. I don't think she's a great wrestler. I don't think that I know she's not a very good striker, but she is a reasonable power wrestler and aggressive at it. She knows exactly what she wants to do with her power wrestling game.
Mm-hmm.
And that has gotten her a long way. And I could easily see it getting her past Shevchenko. I feel like Shevchenko can show the footwork and movement and range striking to stop that from happening. I'm just not sure I trust it. That's the thing. I'm going to pick Shevchenko because I think she's a smart fighter and she fights like a smart fighter. And Peña actually, like, that's kind of one of the main problems with everybody that Peña's beat. Maybe with the exception of Jessica Rakoczy, who just had no real MMA experience at the time Peña beat her and didn't stick with MMA for long afterward. But otherwise, Dudieva, and Ngannou are all fighters who have major problems with their fight IQ and their decision making.
Yeah.
And they were all very willing to take Pena on in exactly the fight Pena wanted. So I'm going to lean Shevchenko that she won't get run over. And by not getting run over immediately out of the gate, Pena is going to get predictable. And as Pena gets predictable, she's going to start losing rounds. But that's not a safe bet.
I think there is a little reason to be nervous about Julianna Pena taking this fight, but I feel fairly confident in Shevchenko, more so than you, and I think more so than Pat did when I talked to him about it. And I think what it really comes down to is something that you just hinted at, which is that Valentina Shevchenko is a fighter who makes decisions, and that is shockingly rare in this division to this day. And a lot of the people Julianna Pena fights, they don't really make their decisions. They don't really game plan or elect to avoid certain kinds of exchanges. Cat Zingano is technically a good enough striker to do to Pena what I expect Shevchenko to do, or something close to it. Problem is that
much more powerful, bigger, and powerful.
For sure, and throws more volume and is in some ways arguably a better striker. But problem is that Cat Zingano gets clinched by Julianna Pena and decides to start wrestling with her. And decides to start grappling with her. Or does she decide? It happens, the opportunity is there, she goes for it. And that happens with a lot of fighters in women's MMA to this day, varying degrees of extremity. Because I've criticized people like Jessica I for that, and Beck Rawlings. They have an opening, they go for it. They don't care if it's wasting their gas tank, if it's a foolish place to take the fight because it's where their opponent is strongest. They just go for it because the opening is there. They don't think about it or plan and put into there. It's like a constant struggle that Conor McGregor had in the rematch with Nate Diaz, where Conor McGregor's conscience was John Kavanagh in the corner, just screaming himself hoarse, do not jump into his guard, do not try to finish him. And Conor he's like, all right, okay, I'm going to listen to my conscience. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to fight smart. He made a decision. And Cat Zingano doesn't do that. And Miliana Dudieva does not do that. And Julianna Pena doesn't do that. No. She deserves credit, I think, for how successful she's been, but I think it's a lot more will than skill. I think she is a solid grappler, and her takedowns are nice, good array of clinch takedowns, pretty good chain wrestling overall. But it's like everything that isn't it's like her only goal in the fight is just to get close to you and get her hands on you. And from there, she's just going by feel. And Valentina Shevchenko is not going to willingly engage in those exchanges. She will only go for a takedown in this fight if it's like a momentary opportunity to put her stamp on that phase, and then she'll get out of there. And she's not going to clinch with Julianna Pena unless she's defending herself and waiting for an opportunity to safely escape back to range. And she's not going to exchange with Julianna Pena. In fact, she's going to hit her with the right hook and then be gone while Pena is still throwing her next 3 punches. So that's what it really comes down to. And the encouraging thing for me about Shevchenko is, yes, I think because Pena is such a swarmer, she could lose a couple rounds early, but Shevchenko took quite a beating from Amanda Nunes, who is more dangerous in top position than Pena by a pretty good margin. And Shevchenko got beat up pretty bad and was still fine in round 3 in that fight. And it might have been a frustrating round, but she didn't look tired or like her confidence was wavering or anything. She was calculated. She was together. And if Shevchenko, who expends very little energy, because she does very little, is still there in rounds 4 and 5 against a Pena who has been constantly running into shots, trying to get her down, wasting energy with reckless abandon, I think Shevchenko might even hurt Pena and have a solid effect on her in the latest rounds. And that's actually my pick. I think Shevchenko will get Pena late with a TKO in the 4th or 5th round.
Yeah, I did forget that this is going to be a 5-round fight. That actually makes me feel a lot more confident about Shevchenko's chances.
Because it's a lot more like, as long as she can survive, she will have an edge late.
Yeah, because Pena just has always tended to burn through her gas tank.
She's a really good athlete, Pena. She looks remarkably fresh in the 3rd rounds of her fights, despite the way she fights. But that still doesn't give me a lot of confidence that she can fight at her preferred pace for 5 rounds. I've not seen it yet, you know?
Yeah, it's an interesting fight because I can also just see Pena bull rushing Shevchenko over and over again and getting takedowns or even just getting one takedown and doing that thing she does where she gets mount and then she just lands ground and pound that isn't extremely effective, but is just effective enough to make the referee decide that this fight should be called and finished.
Her ground and pound is the grappler's version of what Ioane and Jacek does when your back is against the fence. It's a flurry, a flurrying ground and pound.
Yeah. So I'm picking Shevchenko too, but I have visions of Pena overwhelming her with her physicality and her wrestling, it's above average for the division. I should say that. It's not bad wrestling. It's just because her striking is so absent. Her shots are never well set up. Like, she gets things because she's big and strong and she can pick somebody up, and
she'll get her underhooks on you. She's a good wrestler.
Yeah,
and even then, for a wrestler, like, because she's so determined to close the gap, she's actually horrible at stopping takedowns herself.
Yeah.
Ngannou took her down so easily in their fight over and over. Peña's a good scrambler. Everything is 100% effort all the time, that is her greatest strength and her greatest weakness.
Shevchenko opened at minus 170, now at minus 129. And Peña opened at plus 130, now at plus 106. So those odds are rapidly closing. If they close much more, Shevchenko might be worth a bet. I would not bet terribly heavy on this, though, because Shevchenko is not a finisher and Peña is very aggressive, and it just has been able to overwhelm a lot of people. That's still my fear here.
Yeah, I think Shevchenko is not a bad bet. She's about minus 135, minus 120 on some sites right now. I think she's a pretty good. She's so much more of a reliable fighter, especially in 5-round fights. Like, it would not surprise me if Shevchenko managed to be pretty soon a fairly dominant champion, just because I think she's hard to beat. She's not a great finisher. She's not a great winner necessarily, but it's very hard to beat. And in this division, like, Jorge Masvidal will be a really good women's bantamweight. I think just being calculated and being tough to take advantage of will go a long way in the wild west that is women's 135.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It's all about footwork for Shevchenko in this fight and forcing Peña, especially as Peña gets tired, into worse and worse shots.
Footwork and consistency, I would say, are the keys.
Yep. So, all right. Those are our picks. Do you have any other final things to go over that you want to?
No, I can't remember anything these days. We go through the whole card. We have great discussion. And then I'm like, what bets did I say I was making? I don't know. You can go back through. Zane does the wonderful job of time stamping each fight. So check him out.
I don't. Somebody else does that.
Somebody else does. But somebody does the wonderful credit of doing that. So check him out if you want to know my bets.
All right. On that note, if you enjoyed the show, give us a thumbs up over on YouTube down there. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com, DOTCOM. Both those things help us a ton. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush, BUSCH. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com in our various roles. And I will be back for the 6th round after the show. I'll be back for a Bellator Vivisection in a minute. I'm already running late on that. And then we'll be back next week for, what is it? UFC 208. Is that what's next week?
I think so.
Yeah, home to Randomy, the women's featherweight title. We will be back to talk about that.
Don't sound so excited, Zane.
Bermuda versus Korean Zombie is next week.
That's better. That's a better card.
All right. So that's next, the return of the Korean Zombie. We will be all over that like white on rice. And until then, thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.